Section 12 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 12. The History of the First Calendar. Madam, in order to inform you how I lost my right eye, and while I was obliged to put myself into a calendar's habit, I must tell you that I am a sultan's son born. My father had a brother who reigned over a neighboring kingdom, and the prince, his son, and I were nearly of the same age. After I had learned my exercises, the sultan, my father, granted me such liberty as suited my dignity. I went regularly every year to see my uncle, at whose court I amused myself for a month or two, and then returned again to my father's. These journeys cemented a firm and intimate friendship between the prince, my cousin, and myself. The last time I saw him, he received me with greater demonstrations of tenderness than he had done at any time before, and resolving one day to give me a treat, he made great preparations for that purpose. We continued a long time at table, and after we had both supped, "Cousin," said he, "you will hardly be able to guess how I have been employed since your last departure from hence, about a year past. I have had a great many men at work to perfect a design I have formed. I have caused an edifice to be built, which is now finished, so as to be habitable. You will not be displeased if I shew it you. But first you are to promise me upon oath that you will keep my secret, according to the confidence I repose in you." The affection and familiarity that subsisted between us would not allow me to refuse him anything. I very readily took the oath required of me, upon which he said to me, "Stay here till I return. I will be with you in a moment," and accordingly he came with a lady in his hand of singular beauty and magnificently apparelled. He did not intimate who she was, neither did I think it would be polite to inquire. We sat down again with this lady at table, where we continued some time conversing upon indifferent subjects, and now and then filling a glass to each other's health. After which the prince said, "Cousin, we must lose no time, therefore pray oblige me by taking this lady along with you and conducting her to such a place where you will see a tomb newly built in form of a dome. You will easily know it. The gate is open. Enter it together, and tarry till I come, which will be very speedily." Being true to my oath, I made no farther inquiry, but took the lady by the hand, and by the directions which the prince my cousin had given me, I brought her to this place. We were scarcely got thither when we saw the prince following us, carrying a pitcher of water, a hatchet, and a little bag of mortar. The hatchet served him to break down the empty sepulchre in the middle of the tomb. He took away the stones one after another and laid them in a corner. He then dug up the ground, where I saw a trap-door under the sepulchre, which he lifted up, and underneath perceived the head of a staircase leading into a vault. Then my cousin, speaking to the lady, said, "Madam, it is by this way that we are to go to the place I told you of." Upon which the lady advanced and went down, and the prince began to follow, but first turning to me said, "My dear cousin, I am infinitely obliged to you for the trouble you have taken. I thank you. Adieu." "Dear cousin," I cried, "what is the meaning of this?" "Be content," he replied. "You may return the way you came." I could get nothing farther from him, but was obliged to take my leave. As I returned to my uncle's palace, the vapors of the wine got up into my head. However, I reached my apartment and went to bed. Next morning, when I awoke, I began to reflect upon what had happened, and after recollecting all the circumstances of such a singular adventure, I fancied it was nothing but a dream. Full of these thoughts, I sent to inquire if the prince, my cousin, was ready to receive a visit from me. But when they brought back word that he did not lie in his own lodgings that night, that they knew not what was become of him, and were in much trouble in consequence, I conceived that the strange event of the tomb was too true. I was sensibly afflicted, and went to the public burying place, where there were several tombs like that which I had seen. I spent the day in viewing them one after another, but could not find that I sought for, and thus I spent 4 days successively in vain. You must know that all this while the Sultan my uncle was absent, and had been hunting for several days. I grew weary of waiting for him, and having prayed his ministers to make my apology at his return, left his palace and set out towards my father's court. I left the ministers of the Sultan my uncle in great trouble, surmising what was become of the prince, but because of my oath to keep his secret, I durst not tell them what I had seen. I arrived at my father's capital, where, contrary to custom, I found a numerous guard at the gate of the palace, who surrounded me as I entered. I asked the reason, and the commanding officer replied, "Prince, the army has proclaimed a grand vizier instead of your father, who is dead, and I take you prisoner in the name of the new sultan." At these words the guards laid hold of me and carried me before the tyrant. I leave you to judge, madam, how much I was surprised and grieved. This rebel vizier had long entertained a mortal hatred against me for this reason. When I was stripling, I loved to shoot with a crossbow, and being one day upon the terrace of the palace with my bow, a bird happening to come by, I shot but missed him, and the ball, by misfortune, hit the vizier, who was taking the air upon the terrace of his own house, and put out one of his eyes. As soon as I understood this, I not only sent to make my excuse to him, but did it in person. Yet he never forgave me, and, as opportunity offered, made me sensible of his resentment. But now that he had me in his power, he expressed his feelings, for he came to me like a madman, and soon as he saw me, and thrusting his finger into my right eye, pulled it out, and thus I became blind of one eye. But the usurper's cruelty did not stop here. He ordered me to be shut up in a machine, and commanded the executioner to carry me into the country, to cut off my head, and leave me to be devoured by birds of prey. The executioner conveyed me thus, shut up into the country, in order to execute the barbarous sentence, but by my prayers and tears I moved the man's compassion. "Go," he said to me, "get you speedily out of the kingdom, and take heed of returning, or you will certainly meet your own ruin, and be the cause of mine." I thanked him for the favor he did me, and as soon as I was left alone, comforted myself for the loss of my eye, by considering that I had very narrowly escaped a much greater evil. Being in such a condition, I could not travel far at a time. I retired to remote places during the day, and traveled as far by night as my strength would allow me. At last I arrived at the dominions of the Sultan my uncle, and came to his capital. I gave him a long detail of the tragical cause of my return, and of the sad condition he saw me in. "Alas," cried he, "was it not enough for me to have lost my son, but must I have also news of the death of a brother I love so dearly, and see you reduced to this deplorable condition?" He told me how uneasy he was that he could hear nothing of his son, notwithstanding all the inquiry he could make. At these words the unfortunate father burst into tears, and was so much afflicted that, pitying his grief, it was impossible for me to keep the secret any longer, so that, notwithstanding my oath to the prince my cousin, I told the Sultan all I knew. His Majesty listened to me with some sort of comfort, and when I had done, "Nephew," said he, "what you tell me gives me some hope. I knew that my son ordered that tomb to be built, and I can guess pretty nearly the place, and with the idea you still have of it, I fancy we shall find it. But since he ordered it to be built privately, and you took your oath to keep his secret, I am of opinion that we ought to go in quest of it without other attendants." But he had another reason for keeping the matter secret, which he did not then tell me, and an important one it was, as you will perceive by the sequel of my story. We disguised ourselves and went out by the door of the garden which opened into the fields, and soon found what we sought for. I knew the tomb, and was the more rejoiced because I had formerly sought it a long time in vain. We entered, and found the iron trap pulled down at the head of the staircase. We had great difficulty raising it, because the prince had fastened it inside with the water and mortar formerly mentioned, but at last we succeeded. The Sultan, my uncle, descended first, I followed, and then went down about 50 steps. When we came to the foot of the stairs, we found a sort of antechamber full of thick smoke and an ill scent, which obscured the lamp that gave a very faint light. From this antechamber we came into another, very large, supported by columns and lighted by several branched candlesticks. There was a cistern in the middle, and provisions of several sorts stood on one side of it. But we were much surprised not to see any person. Before us there appeared a high estrade, which was mounted by several steps, and upon this there was a large bed with curtains drawn. The Sultan went up, and opening the curtains perceived the prince, his son, and the lady in bed together, but burnt and changed to cinder, as if they had been thrown into a fire and taken out before they were consumed. But what surprised me most was that though this spectacle filled me with horror, the Sultan, my uncle, instead of testifying his sorrow to see the prince, his son, in such a condition, spat on his face and exclaimed with a disdainful air, "This is the punishment of this world, but that of the other will last to eternity." And not content with this, he pulled off his sandal and gave the corpse of his son a blow on the cheek. I cannot adequately express how much I was astonished when I saw the Sultan, my uncle, abuse his son thus after he was dead. "Sir," said I, "whatever grief this dismal sight has impressed upon me, I am forced to suspend it, to inquire of your majesty what crime the prince, my cousin, may have committed, that his corpse should deserve such indignant treatment." "Nephew," replied the Sultan, "I must tell you that my son, who is unworthy of that name, loved his sister from infancy, as she did him. I did not check their growing fondness, because I did not foresee its pernicious consequence. This tenderness increased as they grew in years, and to such a height that I dreaded the end of it. At last I applied such remedies as were in my power. I not only gave my son a severe reprimand in private, laying before him the horrible nature of the passion he entertained, and the eternal disgrace he would bring upon my family if he persisted, but I also represented the same to my daughter, and shut her up so close that she could have no conversation with her brother. But that unfortunate creature had swallowed so much of the poison that all the obstacles which by my prudence I could lay in the way served only to inflame her love. My son, being persuaded of his sister's constancy, on presence of building a tomb, caused this subterraneous habitation to be made, in hopes of finding one day or other an opportunity to possess himself of that objet, which was the cause of his flame, and to bring her hither. He took advantage of my absence to enter by force into the place of his sister's confinement, but this was a circumstance which my honor would not suffer me to make public. And after so damnable an action, he came and shut himself up with her in this place, which he has supplied, as you see, with all sorts of provisions that he might enjoy detestable pleasures, which ought to be the subject of horror to all the world. But God, who would not suffer such an abomination, has justly punished them both." At these words he melted into tears, and I joined mine with his. After a while, casting his eyes upon me, "Dear nephew," cried he, embracing me, "if I have lost that unworthy son, I shall happily find in you what will better supply his place." The reflections he made on the doleful end of the prince and princess, his daughter, made us both weep afresh. We ascended the stairs again and departed at last from that dismal place. We let down the trap-door and covered it with earth and such other materials as the tomb was built of, on purpose to hide as much to lay in our power so terrible an effect of the wrath of God. We had not been long returned to the palace unperceived by anyone, but we heard a confused noise of trumpets, drums, and other instruments of war. We soon understood by the thick cloud of dust which almost darkened the air that it was the arrival of a formidable army. and it proved to be the same vizier that had dethroned my father and usurped his place, who, with a vast number of troops, was come to possess himself of that also of the Sultan my uncle. My uncle, who then had only his usual guards about him, could not resist so numerous an army. They invested the city, and the gates being opened to them without any resistance, soon became masters of it, and broke into the palace, where my uncle defended himself, and sold his life at a dear rate. I fought as valiantly for a while, but seeing we were forced to submit to a superior power, I thought on my retreat, which I had the good fortune to effect by some back ways, and got to one of the Sultan's servants, whose fidelity I could depend. Being thus surrounded with sorrows and persecuted fortune, I had recourse to a stratagem, which was the only means left me to save my life. I caused my beard and eyebrows to be shaved, and putting on a calendar's habit, I passed unknown by any out of the city. After that, by degrees, I found it easy to quit my uncle's kingdom by taking the by-roads. I avoided passing through towns until I had reached the empire of the mighty governor of the Mussulmans, the glorious and renowned Caliph Harun al-Rashid, when I thought myself out of danger. And considering what I was to do, I resolved to come to Baghdad, intending to throw myself at the feet of that monarch, whose generosity is renowned throughout the world. I shall move him to compassion, said I to myself, by the relation of my uncommon misfortunes, and without doubt he will take pity on a persecuted prince, and not suffer me to implore his assistance in vain. In short, after a journey of several months, I arrived yesterday at the gate of this city, into which I entered about the dusk of evening, and stopping a little while to consider which way I was to turn, another calender came up. He saluted me, and I him. "You appear," said I, "to be a stranger, as I am." "You are not mistaken," replied he. He had no sooner returned this answer than a third calender overtook us. He saluted us, and told us he was a stranger newly come to Baghdad, so that as brethren we joined together, resolving not to separate from one another. It was now late, and we knew not where to seek a lodging in the city, where we had never been before. But good fortune having brought us to your gate, we made bold to knock, when you received us with so much kindness that we are incapable of rendering suitable thanks. "This, madam," said he, "is, in obedience to your commands, the account I was to give how I lost my right eye, wherefore my beard and eyebrows are shaved, and how I came to be with you at this time." "It is enough," said Zobeide. "You may retire to what place you think fit." The calender begged the lady's permission to stay till he had heard the relations of his two comrades, whom I cannot, said he, leave with honor, and that he might also hear those of the three other persons in company. The story of the first calender seemed wonderful to the whole company, but especially to the Caliph, who, notwithstanding the slaves stood by with their scimitars drawn, could not forbear whispering to the vizier, "Many stories have I heard, but never any that equaled in surprising incident that of the calender." Whilst he was saying this, the second calender began, addressing himself to Zobeide. End of section 12.
Section 13 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 13. The Story of the Second Calender. Madam, to obey your commands, and to show you by what strange accident I became blind of the right eye, I must of necessity give you the account of my life. I was scarcely past my infancy, when the Sultan my father, for you must know that I am a prince by birth, perceived that I was endowed with good natural ability, and spared nothing proper for improving it. No sooner was I able to read and write, but I learned the Koran, from beginning to end by heart, that admirable book which contains the foundation, the precepts, and the rules of our religion, and that I might be thoroughly instructed in it, I read the works of the most approved divines, by whose commentaries it had been explained. I added to this study that of all the traditions collected from the mouth of our prophet by the great men that were contemporary with him. I was not satisfied with the knowledge of all that had any relation to our religion, but made also a particular search into our histories. I made myself perfect in polite learning, in the works of poets and versification. I applied myself to geography, chronology, and to speak the Arabian language in its purity, not forgetting in the meantime all such exercises as were proper for a prince to understand. But one thing which I was fond of, and succeeded in, was penmanship, wherein I surpassed all the celebrated scribes of our kingdom. Fame did me more honour than I deserved, for she not only spread the renown of my talents through all the dominions of the Sultan my father, but carried it as far as the empire of Hindustan, whose potent monarch, desirous to see me, sent an ambassador with rich presents. My father, who rejoiced at this embassy for several reasons, was persuaded that nothing could be more improving to a prince of my age than to travel and visit foreign courts, and he wished to gain the friendship of the Indian monarch. I departed with the ambassador, but with no great retinue. When we had travelled about a month, we discovered at a distance a cloud of dust, and under that we saw very soon 50 horsemen, well armed, who were robbers, advancing towards us at full speed. As we had 10 horses laden with baggage and presents to the Sultan of Hindustan from my father, and my retinue was but small, you may easily judge that these robbers came boldly up to us, and not being in a posture to make any opposition, we told them that we were ambassadors, and hoped they would attempt nothing contrary to the respect due to such sacred characters, thinking by this means to save our equipage and our lives. But the robbers most insolently replied, "For what reason would you have us show us any respect to the Sultan your master? We are none of his subjects, nor are we upon his territories." Having spoken thus, they surrounded and fell upon us. I defended myself as long as I could, but finding myself wounded, and seeing the ambassador with his attendants and mine lying on the ground, I made use of what strength was yet remaining in my horse, who was also very much wounded, and rode away as fast as he could carry me. But he, shortly after, from weariness and the loss of blood, fell down dead. I cleared myself from him unhurt, and finding that I was not pursued, judged the robbers were not willing to quit the booty they had obtained. Here you see me, alone, wounded, destitute of help, and in a strange country. I durst not take the high road, fearing I might fall again into the hands of these robbers. When I had bound up my wound, which was not dangerous, I walked on the rest of the day, and arrived at the foot of a mountain, where I perceived a passage into a cave. I went in, and stayed there that night with little satisfaction, after I had eaten some fruits that I had gathered by the way. I continued my journey for several days, following without finding any place of abode. But after a month's time I came to a large town, well inhabited and situated so much the more advantageously, as it was surrounded by several streams, so that it enjoyed perpetual spring. The pleasant objects which then presented themselves to my view afforded me some joy, and suspended for a time the sorrow with which I was overwhelmed. My face, hands, and feet were black and sunburnt, and by my long journey my boots were quite worn out, so that I was forced to walk barefooted, and besides, my clothes were all in rags. I entered the town to inform myself where I was, and addressed myself to a tailor that was at work in his shop, who, perceiving by my air that I was a person of more note than my outward appearance bespoke, made me sit down by him, and asked me who I was, from whence I came, and what had brought me thither. I did not conceal anything that had befallen me, nor made I any scruple to discover my quality. The tailor listened to me with attention, but after had done speaking, instead of giving me any consolation, he augmented my sorrow. "Take heed," said he, "how you discover to any person what you have related to me, for the prince of this country is the greatest enemy your father has, and he will certainly do you some mischief should he hear of your being in this city." I made no doubt of the tailor's sincerity when he named the prince, but since that enmity which is between my father and him has no relation to my adventures, I pass over it in silence. I returned the tailor thanks for his advice, expressed myself disposed to follow his counsel, and assured him that his favours should never be forgotten. He ordered something to be bought for me to eat, and offered me at the same time a lodging in his house, which I accepted. Some days after, finding me tolerably well recovered of the fatigue I had endured by a long and tedious journey, and reflecting that most princes of our religion applied themselves to some art or calling that might be serviceable to them upon occasion, he asked me if I had learned any whereby I might get a livelihood, and not be burdensome to others. I told him that I understood the laws, both divine and human, that I was a grammarian and poet, and above all, that I could write with great perfection. "By all this," said he, "you will not be able in this country to purchase yourself one morsel of bread. Nothing is of less use here than those sciences, but if you will be advised by me, dress yourself in a labourer's habit, and since you appear to be strong, and of a good constitution, you shall go into the next forest and cut firewood, which you may bring to the market to be sold, and I can assure you this employment will turn to so good an account that you may live by it without dependence upon any man, and by this means you will be in a condition to wait for the favourable minute when heaven shall think fit to dispel those clouds of misfortune that thwart your happiness, and oblige you to conceal your birth. I will take care to supply you with a rope and a hatchet." The fear of being known, and the necessity I was under of getting a livelihood, made me agree to this proposal, notwithstanding the meanness and hardships that attended it. The day following the tailor brought me a rope, a hatchet, and a short coat, and recommended me to some poor people who gained their bread after the same manner, that they might take me into their company. They conducted me to the wood, and the first day I brought in as much upon my head as procured me half a piece of gold, of the money of that country, for though the wood was not far distant from the town, yet it was very scarce, by reason that few would be at the trouble of fetching it for themselves. I gained a good sum of money in a short time, and repaid my tailor what he had advanced to me. I continued this way of living for a whole year. One day, having by chance penetrated further into the wood than usual, I happened to light on a pleasant spot, where I began to cut, and in pulling up the root of a tree, I espied an iron ring, fastened to a trap door of the same metal. I took away the earth that covered it, and having lifted it up, discovered a flight of stairs, which I descended with my axe in my hand. When I had reached the bottom, I found myself in a palace, and felt great consternation, on account of a great light which appeared as clear in it as if it had been above ground in the open air. I went forward along a gallery, supported by pillars of jasper, the base and capitals of messy gold. But seeing a lady of a noble and graceful air, extremely beautiful, coming towards me, my eyes were taken off from every other object. Being desirous to spare the lady the trouble of coming to me, I hastened to meet her, and as I was saluting her with a low obeisance, she asked me, "What are you, a man or a genie?" "A man, madam," said I have no correspondence with genies." "By what adventure," said she, fetching a deep sigh, "are you come hither? I have lived here 25 years, and you are the first man I have beheld in that time." Her great beauty, which had already smitten me, and the sweetness and civility wherewith she received me, emboldened me to say, "Madam, before I have the honour to satisfy your curiosity, give me leave to tell you that I am infinitely gratified with this unexpected meeting, which offers me an occasion of consolation in the midst of my affliction, and perhaps it may give me an opportunity of making you also more happy than you are." I related to her by what strange accident she beheld me, the son of a sultan, in such a condition as I appeared in her presence, and how fortune had directed that I should discover the entrance into that magnificent prison where I had found her, according to appearance, in an unpleasant situation. "Alas, prince," said she, sighing once more, "you have just cause to believe this rich and pompous prison cannot be otherwise than a most wearisome abode, the most charming place in the world being no way delightful when we are detained there contrary to our will. It is not possible but you have heard of the Sultan of the Isle of Ebene, so called from that precious wood which it produces in abundance. I am the princess, his daughter. The Sultan, my father, had chosen for me a husband, a prince who was my cousin, but on my wedding night, in the midst of the rejoicings of the court and capital, before I was conducted to my husband, a genie took me away. I fainted with alarm, and when I recovered, found myself in this place. I was long inconsolable, but time and necessity have accustomed me to see and receive the genie. 25 years I have continued in this place, where I must confess I have all that I can wish for necessary to life, and also everything that can satisfy a princess fond of dress and splendour. Every 10 days, continued the princess, the genie comes hither and remains with me one night, which he never exceeds, and the excuse he makes for it is that he is married to another wife, who would grow jealous if she should know his infidelity. Meanwhile, if I have occasion for him by day or night, as soon as I touch a talisman which is at the entrance to my chamber, the genie appears. It is now the 4th day since he was here, and I do not expect him before the end of 6 more. So, if you please, you may stay 5 days, and I will endeavour to entertain you according to your quality and merit." I thought myself too fortunate to have obtained so great a favour without asking, to refuse so obliging an offer. The princess made me go into a bath, the most commodious and the most sumptuous imaginable, and when I came forth, instead of my own clothes, I found another very costly suit, which I did not esteem so much for its richness as because it made me appear worthy to be in her company. We sat down on a sofa covered with rich tapestry, with cushions of the rarest Indian brocade, and some time after she covered a table with several dishes of delicate meats. We ate and passed the remaining part of the day with much satisfaction, as also the evening together. The next day, as she contrived every means to please me, she brought in at dinner a bottle of old wine, the most excellent that ever was tasted, and out of complaisance drank some part of it with me. When my head grew warm with the agreeable liquor, "Fair princess," said I, "you have been too long thus buried alive. Follow me, enjoy the real day of which you have been so deprived so many years, and abandon this artificial though brilliant glare." "Prince," replied she with a smile, "leave this discourse. If you out of 10 days will grant me 9, and resign the last to the genie, the fairest day would be nothing in my esteem. Princess, said I, it is the fear of the genie that makes you speak thus. For my part, I value him so little that I will break in pieces his talisman with the conjuration that is written about it. Let him come, I will expect him, and how brave or redoubtable soever he be, I will make him feel the weight of my arm. I swear solemnly that I will extirpate all the genies in the world, and him first. The princess, who knew the consequence, conjured me not to touch the talisman, for that would be the means, said she, of ruining both you and me. I know what belongs to genies better than you. The fumes of the wine did not suffer me to hearken to her reasons, but I gave the talisman a kick with my foot, and broke it in several places. The talisman was no sooner broken than the palace began to shake, and seemed ready to fall, with a hideous noise like thunder, accompanied with flashes of lightning and alternate darkness. This terrible noise in a moment dispelled the fumes of my wine, and made me sensible, but too late, of the folly I had committed. Princess, cried I, what means all this? She answered without any concern for her own misfortune. Alas, you are undone, if you do not fly immediately. I followed her advice, but my fears were so great that I forgot my hatchet and cords. I had scarcely reached the stairs by which I had descended when the enchanted palace opened at once and made a passage for the genie. He asked the princess in great anger, What has happened to you, and why did you call me? A violent spasm, said the princess, made me fetch this bottle which you see here, out of which I drank twice or thrice, and by mischance made a false step, and fell upon the talisman, which is broken, and that is all. At this answer the furious genie told her, You are a false woman, and speak not the truth. How came that axe and those cords there? I never saw them till this moment, said the princess. Your coming in such an impetuous manner has, it may be, forced them up in some place as you came along, and so brought them hither without your knowing it. The genie made no other answer but what was accompanied with reproaches and blows, of which I heard the noise. I could not endure to hear the pitiful cries of the princess so cruelly abused. I had already taken off the suit she had presented to me, and put on my own, which I had laid on the stairs the day before. When I came out of the bagnio, I made haste upstairs, the more distracted with sorrow and compassion, as I had been the cause of so great a misfortune, and by sacrificing the fairest princess on earth to the barbarity of a merciless genie, I was becoming the most criminal and ungrateful of mankind. It is true, said I, she has been a prisoner these 25 years, but, liberty accepted, she wanted nothing that could make her happy. My folly has put an end to her happiness, and brought upon her the cruelty of an unmerciful devil. I let down the trapdoor, covered it again with earth, and returned to the city with a burden of wood, which I bound up without knowing what I did, so great was my trouble and sorrow. My landlord, the tailor, was very much rejoiced to see me. Your absence, said he, has disquieted me much, as you had entrusted me with the secret of your birth, and I knew not what to think. I was afraid somebody had discovered you. God be praised for your return. I thanked him for his zeal and affection, but not a word durst I say of what had passed, nor of the reason why I came back without my hatchet and cords. I retired to my chamber, while I reproached myself 1,000 times for my excessive imprudence. Nothing, said I, could have paralleled the princess's good fortune and mine, had I forborne to break the talisman. While I was thus giving myself over to melancholy thoughts, the tailor came in and said, An old man, whom I do not know, brings your hatchet and cords, which he found in his way, as he tells me, and says he understood from your comrades that you lodge here. Come out and speak to him, for he will deliver them to none but yourself." At these words I changed colour, and fell a trembling. While the tailor was asking me the reason, my chamber door opened, and the old man, having no patience to stay, appeared to us with my hatchet and cords. This was the genie, the ravisher of the fair princess of the Isle of Ebene, who had thus disguised himself after he had treated her with the utmost barbarity. "I am a genie," said he, speaking to me, "son of the daughter of Eblis, prince of genies. Is not this your hatchet? Are not these your cords?" After the genie had put the question to me, he gave me no time to answer, nor was it in my power, so much had his terrible aspect disordered me. He grasped me by the middle, dragged me out of the chamber, and mounting into the air, carried me up to the skies with such swiftness that I was not able to take notice of the way he conveyed me. He descended again in like manner to the earth, which on a sudden he caused to open with a stroke of his foot, and sunk down at once, when I found myself in the enchanted palace before the fair princess of the Isle of Ebene. But alas! What a spectacle was there! I saw what pierced me to the heart. This poor princess was quite naked, weltering in her blood, and laid upon the ground, more like one dead than alive, with her cheeks bathed in tears. "Perfidious wretch," said the genie to her, pointing at me, "is not this your gallant?" She cast her languishing eyes upon me, and answered mournfully, "I do not know him. I never saw him till this moment." "What?" said the genie, "he is the cause of thy being in the condition thou art justly in, and yet darest thou say thou dost not know him?" "If I do not know him," said the princess, "would you have me lie on purpose to ruin him?" "Oh then," said the genie, pulling out a scimitar and presenting it to the princess, "if you never saw him before, take this and cut off his head." "Alas," replied the princess, "how is it possible that I should execute such an act? My strength is so far spent that I cannot lift up my arm, and if I could, how should I have the heart to take away the life of an innocent man, and one whom I do not know?" "This refusal," said the genie to the princess, "sufficiently informs me of your crime." Upon which, turning to me, "And thou," said he, "dost thou not know her?" I should have been the most ungrateful wretch, and most perfidious of all mankind, if I had not strewn myself as faithful to the princess as she had been to me, who had been the cause of her misfortunes. I therefore answered the genie, "How should I know her, when I never saw her till now?" "If it be so," said he, "take the scimitar and cut off her head. On this condition I will set thee at liberty, for then I shall be convinced that thou hast never seen her till this moment, as thou givest." "With all my heart," replied I, and took the scimitar in my hand. Do not think, madam, that I drew near to the fair princess of the Isle of Ebene to be the executioner of the genie's barbarity. I did it only to demonstrate by my behaviour, as much as possible, that as she had strewn her resolution to sacrifice her life for my sake, I should not refuse to sacrifice mine for hers. The princess, notwithstanding her pain and suffering, understood my meaning, which she signified by an obliging look, and made me understand her willingness to die for me, and that she was satisfied to see how ready I was also to die for her. Upon this I stepped back and threw the scimitar on the ground. "I should for ever," said I to the genie, "be hateful to all mankind, were I to be so base as to murder not only a person whom I do not know, but a lady like this, who is already on the point of expiring. Do with me what you please, since I am in your power. I cannot obey your barbarous commands." "I see," said the genie, "that you both outbrave me, and insult my jealousy, but both of you shall know by my treatment of you of what I am capable." At these words the monster took up the scimitar and cut off one of her hands, which left her only so much life as to give me a token with the other that she bade me ever adieu. For the blood she had lost before, and that which gushed out then, did not permit her to live above 1 or 2 moments after this barbarous cruelty, the sight of which threw me into a fit. When I was come to myself again, I expostulated with the genie, why he made me languish in expectation of death. "Strike," cried I, "for I am ready to receive the mortal blow, and expect it as the greatest favour you can show me." But instead of agreeing to that, "Behold," said he, "how genies treat their wives who they suspect of unfaithfulness. She has received thee here, and were I certain that she had put any further affront upon me, I would put thee to death this minute, but I will content myself with transforming thee into a dog, ape, lion, or bird. Take thy choice of any of these, I will leave it to thyself." These words gave me some hopes of being able to appease him. "O genie," said I, "moderate your passion, and since you will not take away my life, give it me generously. I shall always remember your clemency, if you pardon me, as one of the best men in the world pardoned one of his neighbours that bore him a mortal hatred." The genie asked me what had passed between those 2 neighbours, and said he would have patience till he heard the story, which I related to him, and I believe, madam, you will not be displeased if I now repeat it. End of Section 13.
Section 14 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marta Arevalo, Guatemala City, Guatemala. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous. Translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 14. The Story of the Envious Man and Him that he envied. In a considerable town 2 persons dwelt in adjoining houses. One of them conceived such a violent hatred against the other, that the hated party resolved to remove to a distance, being persuaded that their being neighbours was the only cause of this animosity. For though he had done him several pieces of service, he found that his hatred was not diminished. He therefore sold his house, with what goods he had left, and retired to the capital city of a kingdom which was not far distant. Here he bought a little spot of ground, which lay about half a league from the city, where he had a convenient house, with a garden, and a pretty spacious court, wherein there was a deep well, which was not in use. The honest man, having made this purchase, put on a dervish's habit, intending to lead a retired life, and caused several cells to be made in the house, where in a short time he established a numerous society of dervishes. He soon came to be publicly known by his virtue, through which he acquired the esteem of many people, as well of the commonalty as of the chief of the city. In short, he was much honoured and courted by all ranks. People came from afar to recommend themselves to his prayers, and all who visited him published what blessings they received through his means. The great reputation of this honest man having spread to the town from where he had come, it touched the envious man so much to the quick, that he left his house and affairs with a resolution to ruin him. With this intent he went to the new convent for dervishes, of which his former neighbour was the head, who received him with all imaginable tokens of friendship. The envious man told him that he was come on purpose to communicate a business of importance, which he could not do but in private, and that nobody may hear us. Let us, said he, take a walk in your court, and seeing night begins to draw on, command your dervishes to retire to their cells. The chief of the dervishes did as he was required. When the envious man saw that he was alone with this good man, he began to tell him his errand, walking side by side in the court, till he saw his opportunity, and getting the good man near the brink of the well, he gave him a thrust, and pushed him into it, without being seen by anyone. Having done thus, he returned, got out at the gate of the convent without being known, and reached his own house well satisfied with his journey, being fully persuaded that the object of his hatred was no more. But he found himself mistaken. This old well was inhabited by fairies and genies, which happened luckily for the relief of the head of the convent, for they received and supported him, and carried him to the bottom, so that he got no hurt. He perceived that there was something extraordinary in his fall, which must otherwise have cost him his life, but he neither saw nor felt anything. He soon heard a voice, however, which said, "Do you know what honest man this is, to whom we have done this piece of service?" Another voice answered, "No." To which the first replied, "Then I will tell you. This man, out of charity, the purest ever known, left the town he lived in, and has established himself in this place, in hopes to cure one of his neighbours of the envy he had conceived against him. He had acquired such general esteem, that the envious man, not able to endure it, came hither on purpose to ruin him, and he would have accomplished his design, had it not been for the assistance we have given this honest man, whose reputation is so great, that the Sultan, who keeps his residence in the neighbouring city, has to pay him a visit tomorrow, to recommend the princess his daughter to his prayers." Another voice asked, "What need had the princess of the dervish's prayers?" To which the first answered, "You do not know, it seems, that she is possessed by Genie Maimoun, son of Dimdim, who has fallen in love with her. But I well know how this good head of the dervishes may cure her. The thing is very easy, and I will explain it to you. He has a black cat in his convent, with a white spot at the end of her tail, about the bigness of a small piece of Arabian money. Let him only pull 7 hairs out of the white spot, burn them, and smoke the princess's head with the fume. She will not only be immediately cured, but be so safely delivered from Maimoun, the son of Dimdim, that he will never dare to approach her again." The head of the dervishes remembered every word of the conversation between the fairies and the genies, who remained silent the remainder of the night. The next morning, as soon as daylight appeared, and he could discern the nature of his situation, the well being broken down in several places, he saw a hole, by which he crept out with ease. The other dervishes, who had been seeking for him, were rejoiced to see him. He gave them a brief account of the wickedness of the man whom he had given so kind a reception the day before, and retired into his cell. Shortly after, the black cat, which the fairies and genies had mentioned the night before, came to fawn upon her master, as she was accustomed to do. He took her up, and pulled 7 hairs from the white spot that was upon her tail, and laid them aside for his use when the occasion should serve. Soon after sunrise, the Sultan, who would leave no means untried that he thought of likely to restore the princess to perfect health, arrived at the gate of the convent. He commanded his guards to halt, whilst he, with his principal officers, went in. The dervishes received him with profound respect. The Sultan called their chief aside, and said, "Good sheikh, you may probably be already acquainted with the cause of my visit." "Yes, sir," replied he gravely. "If I do not mistake, it is the disease of the princess which procures me this unmerited honour." "That is the real case," replied the Sultan. "You will give me new life, if your prayers, as I hope they may, restore my daughter's health." "Sir," said the good man, "if your majesty will be pleased to let her come hither, I am in hopes, through God's assistance and favour, that she will be effectually cured." The prince, transported with joy, sent immediately for his daughter, who soon appeared with a numerous train of ladies and eunuchs, but veiled, so that her face was not seen. The chief of the dervishes caused a pall to be held over her head, and he had no sooner thrown the 7 hairs upon the burning coals, than the genie Maimoun, the son of Dimdim, uttered a great cry, and without being seen left the princess at liberty, upon which she took the veil from her face, and rose up to see where she was, saying, "Where am I, and who has brought me hither?" At these words the Sultan, overcome with excess of joy, embraced his daughter, and kissed her eyes. He also kissed the chief of the dervishes' hands, and said to his officers, "What reward does he deserve that has thus cured my daughter?" They all cried, "He deserves her in marriage." "That is what I've had in my thoughts," said the Sultan, "and I make him my son-in-law from this moment." Some time after, the prime vizier died, and the Sultan conferred the place on the dervish. The Sultan himself also died without heirs male, upon which the religious orders and the militia consulted together, and the good man was declared and acknowledged Sultan by general consent. The honest dervish, having ascended the throne of his father-in-law, as he was one day in the midst of his courtiers on a march, espied the envious man among the crowd that stood as he passed along, and calling one of the viziers that attended him, whispered in his ear, "Go, bring me that man you see there, but take care you do not frighten him." The vizier obeyed, and when the envious man was brought into his presence, the Sultan said, "Friend, I am extremely glad to see you," upon which he called an officer. "Go immediately," said he, "and cause to be paid this man out of my treasury 100 pieces of gold. Let him have also 20 loads of the richest merchandise in my storehouses, and sufficient guard to conduct him to his house." After he had given this charge to the officer, he bade the envious man farewell, and proceeded on his march. When I had finished the recital of this story to the genie, the murderer of the princess of the Isle of Ebony, I made an application of it to himself. "O genie," said I, "this bountiful sultan was not satisfied with merely overlooking the design of the envious man to take away his life, but also treated him kindly, and sent him back loaded with the favours I have enumerated. In short, I employed all my eloquence to persuade him to imitate so good an example, and to grant me pardon, but it was impossible to move his compassion. All that I can do for thee," said he, "is to grant thee thy life, but do not flatter thyself that I will allow thee to return safe and well. I must let thee feel what I am able to do by my enchantments." So saying, he seized me violently, and carried me through the arched roof of the subterraneous palace, which opened to give him passage. He ascended with me into the air to such a height that the earth appeared like a little white cloud. He then descended again like lightning, and alighted upon the summit of a mountain. Here he took up a handful of earth, and pronouncing, or rather muttering, some words which I did not understand, threw it upon me. "Quit," said he, "the form of a man, and take that of an ape." He instantly disappeared, and left me alone, transformed into an ape, and overwhelmed with sorrow in a strange country, not knowing whether I was near or far from my father's dominions. I descended the mountain, and entered a plain level country, which took me a month to travel over, and then I came to the seaside. It happened at the time to be perfectly calm, and I espied a vessel about half a league from the shore. Unwilling to lose so good an opportunity, I broke off a large branch from a tree, carried it into the sea, and placed myself astride upon it, with a stick in each hand to serve me for oars. I launched out in this posture, and rowed towards the ship. When I had approached sufficiently near to be seen, I exhibited to the seamen and passengers on the deck an extraordinary spectacle, and all of them regarded me with astonishment. In the meantime I got on board, and laying hold of a rope, jumped upon the deck, but having lost my speech, I found myself in great perplexity, and indeed the risk I ran was not less than when I was at the mercy of the genie. The merchants, being both superstitious and scrupulous, thought if they received me on board I should be the occasion of some misfortune to them during their voyage. On this account one of them said, "I will destroy him with a blow of this handspike." Another, "I will shoot an arrow through his body." And the third, "Let us throw him into the sea." Some of them would not have failed to carry his threat into execution, had I not gone to the captain, thrown myself at his feet, and taken hold of his skirt in a supplicating posture. This action, together with the tears which he saw gush from my eyes, moved his compassion. He took me under his protection, threatened to be revenged on any one that would do me the least hurt, and loaded me with 1,000 caresses. On my part, though I had no power to speak, I showed by my gestures every mark of gratitude in my power. The wind that succeeded the calm was not strong, but favorable. It continued to blow in the same direction for 50 days, and brought us safe to the port of a city, well peopled and of great trade, the capital of a powerful state, where we came to anchor. Our vessel was instantly surrounded with an infinite number of boats full of people, who came to congratulate their friends on their safe arrival, or to inquire for those they had left behind them in the country from whence they had come, or out of curiosity to see a ship that had performed so long a voyage. Amongst the rest, some officers came on board, desiring in the name of the Sultan to speak with the merchants. The merchants appearing, one of the officers told them, "The Sultan our master hath commanded us to acquaint you, that he rejoices in your safe arrival, and beseeches each of you to take the trouble to write a few lines upon this roll. That you may understand the design of this request, you must know that we had a prime vizier, who besides possessing great abilities for the management of public affairs, could write in the highest perfection. This minister a few days since died. The event has greatly affected the Sultan, and since he can never behold his writing without admiration, he has made a solemn vow not to give the place to anyone who cannot write equally well. Many have presented specimens of their skill, but to this day no one in the empire has been judged worthy to supply the vizier's place." Those of the merchants who thought they could write well enough to aspire to this high dignity wrote one after another what they thought fit. After they had done, I advanced, and took the roll out of the gentleman's hand, but all the people, especially the merchants, cried out, that I would tear it, or throw it into the sea, till they saw how properly I held the roll, and made a sign that I would write in my turn. Their apprehensions then changed into wonder. However, as they had never seen an ape that could write, and could not be persuaded that I was more ingenious than others of my kind, they wished to take the roll out of my hand. But the captain took my part once more. "Let him alone," said he. "Allow him to write. If he only scribbles the paper, I promise you that I will immediately punish him. If, on the contrary, he writes well, as I hope he will, because I never saw an ape so clever and ingenious, and so quick of apprehension, I declare that I will adopt him as my son." Perceiving that no one opposed my design, I took the pen, and wrote 6 sorts of hands used among the Arabians, and each specimen contained an extemporary distich or quatrain in praise of the Sultan. My writing not only excelled that of the merchants, but was such as they had not before seen in that country. When I had done, the officers took the roll, and carried it to the Sultan. The Sultan took little notice of any of the writings except mine, which pleased him so much that he said to the officers, "Take the finest horse in my stable, with the richest trappings, and robe of the most sumptuous brocade, to put on the person who wrote the 6 hands, and bring him thither." At this command the officers could not forbear laughing. The Sultan was incensed at their rudeness, and would have punished them had they not explained. "Sir," said they, "we humbly beg your Majesty's pardon. These hands were not written by a man, but by an ape." "What do you say?" exclaimed the Sultan. "Those admirable characters, are they not written by the hands of a man?" "No, sir," replied the officers. "We assure your Majesty that it was an ape who wrote them in our presence." The Sultan was too much surprised at this account not to desire a sight of me, and therefore said, "Do what I command you, and bring me speedily that wonderful ape." The officers returned to the vessel, and showed the captain their order, who answered, "The Sultan's command must be obeyed." Whereupon they clothed me with the rich brocade robe, and carried me ashore, where they set me on horseback, whilst the Sultan waited for me at his palace with a great number of courtiers, whom he gathered together to do me the more honour. The procession commenced. The harbour, the streets, the public places, windows, terraces, palaces, and houses were filled with an infinite number of people of all ranks, who flocked from every part of the city to see me, for the rumour was spread in a moment that the Sultan had chosen an ape to be his Grand Vizier, and after having served for a spectacle to the people, who could not forbear to express their surprise by redoubling their shouts and cries, I arrived at the Sultan's palace. I found the Prince on his throne in the midst of the grandees. I made my obeisance 3 times very low, and at last kneeled and kissed the ground before him, and afterwards took my seat in the posture of an ape. The whole assembly viewed me with admiration, and could not comprehend how it was possible that an ape should so well understand how to pay the Sultan his due respect, and he himself was more astonished than any. In short, the usual ceremony of the audience would have been complete, could I have added speech to my behaviour, but apes never speak, and the advantage I had of having been a man did not now yield me that privilege. The Sultan dismissed his courtiers, and none remained by him but the chief of the eunuchs, a little young slave, and myself. He went from his chamber of audience into his own apartment, where he ordered dinner to be brought. As he sat at the table he made me a sign to approach and eat with them. To show my obedience, I kissed the ground, arose, and placed myself at the table, and ate with discretion and moderation. Before the table was cleared, I espied a standish, which I made a sign to have brought me. Having got it, I wrote upon a large peach some verses expressive of my acknowledgment to the Sultan, who, having read them after I had presented the peach to him, was still more astonished. When the things were removed, they brought him a particular liquor, of which he caused them to give me a glass. I drank, and wrote upon the glass some new verses, which explained the state I was reduced to after many sufferings. The Sultan read these likewise, and said, "A man that was capable of doing so much would be above the greatest of his species." The Sultan caused to be brought him a chessboard, and asked me by a sign if I understood that game, and would play with him. I kissed the ground, and laying my hand upon my head, signified that I was ready to receive that honour. He won the first game, but I won the second and third, and perceiving he was somewhat displeased at my success, I made a quatrain to satisfy him, in which I told him that two potent armies had been fighting furiously all day, but that they concluded a peace towards the evening, and passed the remaining part of the night very amicably together upon the field of battle. So many circumstances appearing to the Sultan beyond whatever had either been seen or known of the cleverness or sense of apes, he determined not to be the only witness of these prodigies himself, but having a daughter, called the Lady of Beauty, on whom the chief of the eunuchs then present waited. "Go," said the Sultan to him, "and bid your lady come hither. I am desirous she should share my pleasure." The eunuch went, and immediately brought the princess, who had her face uncovered. But she had no sooner come into the room than she put her veil on, and said to the Sultan, "Sir, your Majesty must needs have forgotten yourself. I am surprised that your Majesty has sent for me to appear among men." "How, daughter?" said the Sultan. "You do not know what you say. There is no one here but the little slave, the eunuch your governor, and myself, who have the liberty to see your face, and yet you lower your veil, and blame me for having sent for you." "Sir," said the princess, "your Majesty shall soon understand that I am not in the wrong. That seeming ape is a young prince, son of a powerful sultan, and has been metamorphosed into an ape by enchantment. A genie, son of the daughter of Elvis, has maliciously done him this wrong, after having cruelly taken away the life of the princess of the Isle of Ebony." The Sultan, astonished at this declaration, turned towards me, and speaking no more by signs, but in plain words, asked me if what his daughter had said was true. Finding I could not speak, I put my hand to my head to signify that what the princess spoke was correct. Upon this the Sultan said again to his daughter, "How do you know that this prince has been transformed by enchantments into an ape?" "Sir," replied the Lady of Beauty, "your Majesty may remember that when I was past my infancy, I had an old lady who waited on me. She was a most expert magician, and taught me 70 rules of magic, by virtue of which I can, in the twinkling of an eye, transport your capital into the midst of the sea, or beyond Mount Caucasus. By this science I know all enchanted persons at first sight. I know who they are, and by whom they have been enchanted. Therefore do not be surprised if I should forthwith relieve this prince, in spite of the enchantments, from that which prevents his appearing in your sight in his natural form." "Daughter," said the Sultan, "I did not believe you have understood so much." "Sir," replied the princess, "these things are curious and worth knowing, but I think I ought not to boast of them." "Since it is so," said the Sultan, "you can dispel the prince's enchantment." "Yes, sir," said the princess, "I can restore him to his original shape." "Do it then," said the Sultan. "You cannot do me a greater pleasure, for I will have him to be my vizier, and he shall marry you." "Sir," said the Princess, "I am ready to obey you in all that you should be pleased to command me." The Princess, the Lady of Beauty, went into her apartment, and brought thence a knife, which had some Hebrew words engraven on the blade. She made the Sultan, the master of the eunuchs, the little slave, and myself descend into a private court of the palace, and there left us under a gallery that went round it. She placed herself in the middle of the court, where she made a great circle, and within it she wrote several words in Arabian characters, some of them ancient. When she had finished and prepared the circle as she saw fit, she placed herself in the center of it, where she began incantations, and repeated verses of the Koran. The air grew insensibly dark, as if it had been night, and the whole world were about to be dissolved. We found ourselves struck with a consternation, and our fear increased when we saw the Genie, the son of the daughter of Eblis, appear suddenly in the shape of a lion of a gigantic size. As soon as the Princess perceived this monster, "Dog," said she, "instead of creeping before me, dare you present yourself in this shape, thinking to frighten me?" "And thou," replied the lion, "art thou not afraid to break the treaty which has solemnly made and confirmed between us by oath, not to wrong or do another any injury?" "Wretch," replied the Princess, "I justly may reproach thee with having done so." The lion answered fiercely, "Thou shalt quickly have thy reward for the trouble thou hast given me." With that he opened his monstrous jaws, and sprang forward to devour her, but she, being on her guard, stepped back, got time to pull out one of her hairs, and by pronouncing 3 or 4 words, changed it into a sharp sword, with which she cut the lion in 2 through the middle. The 2 parts of the lion disappeared, while the head changed into a large scorpion. Immediately the Princess turned herself into a serpent, and fought the scorpion, who, finding himself worsted, took the shape of an eagle, and flew away. But the serpent at the same time took also the shape of an eagle, that was black and much stronger, and pursued him, so that we lost sight of them both. Some time after they had disappeared, the ground opened before us, and out of it came forth a black and white cat, with their hair standing on end, and mewing in a frightful manner. A black wolf followed close after her, and gave her no time to rest. The cat, being thus hard pressed, changed into a worm, and being near a pomegranate, accidentally fallen from a tree on the side of a canal which was deep, but not broad, pierced the pomegranate in an instant, and hid itself, but the pomegranate swelled immediately, and became as big as a gourd, which, mounting up to the roof of the gallery, rolled there for some time backward and forward, and then fell down again on to the court, and broke into several pieces. The wolf had in the meanwhile transformed itself into a cock, and now fell to picking up the seeds of the pomegranate, one after another. But finding no more, he came towards us with his wings spread, making a great noise, as if he would ask us whether there were any more seed. There was one lying on the brink of the canal, which the cock, perceiving as he went back, ran speedily thither, but just as he was going to pick it up, the seed rolled into the river, and turned into a little fish. The cock leaped into the river, turned into a pike, and pursued the small fish. They continued both under water above 2 hours, and we knew not what was become of them, but suddenly we heard terrible cries, which made us tremble, and a little while after we saw the Genie and the Princess all in flames. They threw flashes of fire out of their mouths at each other, till they came to a close combat. Then the 2 fires increased, with a thick burning smoke which mounted so high that we had reason to apprehend it would set the place on fire. But we very soon had a more pressing occasion of fear, for the Genie, having got loose from the Princess, came to the gallery where we stood, and blew flames of fire upon us. We must all have perished had not the Princess, running to our assistance, forced him to retire, and defend himself against her. Yet, notwithstanding all her exertions, she could not hinder the Sultan's beard from being burnt, and his face scorched, the chief of the eunuchs from being stifled, and a spark from entering my right eye and making it blind. The Sultan and I expected but death, when we heard a cry of "Victory! Victory!" and instantly the princess appeared in her natural shape, but the genie was reduced to a heap of ashes. The princess approached us, and hastily called for a cup full of water, which the young slave, who had received no hurt, brought her. She took it, and after pronouncing some words over it, threw it upon me, saying, "If thou art become an ape by enchantment, change thy shape, and take that of a man which thou hadst before." These words were hardly uttered when I again became a man, in every respect as I was before my transformation, excepting the loss of my eye. I was prepared to return the princess my thanks, but she prevented me by addressing herself to her father. "Sir, I have gained the victory over the genie, as your majesty may see, but it is a victory that costs me dear. I have but a few minutes to live, and you will not have the satisfaction to make me the match you intended. The fire has pierced me during the terrible combat, and I find it is gradually consuming me. This would not have happened had I perceived the last of the pomegranate seed, and swallowed it, as I did the others when I was changed into a cock. The genie had fled thither as to his last entrenchment, and upon that the success of the combat depended, which would have been successful, and without danger to me. This oversight obliged me to have recourse to fire, and to fight with those mighty arms as I did between heaven and earth in your presence, for in spite of all this redoubtable art and experience, I made the genie know that I understood more than he. I have conquered and reduced him to ashes, but I cannot escape death, which is approaching." The Sultan suffered the princess, the Lady of Beauty, to go on with the recital of her combat, and when she had done, addressed her in a tone that sufficiently testified his grief. "My daughter," said he, "you see in what condition your father is. Alas, I wonder that I am yet alive. Your governor, the eunuch, is dead, and the prince whom you have delivered from his enchantment has lost one of his eyes." He could say no more, for his tears, sighs, and sobs deprived him of the power of utterance. Suddenly the princess exclaimed, "I burn! I burn!" She found that the fire had at last seized upon her vital parts, which made her still cry, "I burn!" until death had put an end to her intolerable pains. The effect of that fire was so extraordinary that in a few moments she was wholly reduced to ashes, as the genie had been. I cannot tell you, madam, how much I was grieved at so dismal a spectacle. I had rather all my life have continued an ape or a dog, than to have seen my benefactress thus miserably perish. The Sultan, being afflicted all that can be imagined, cried piteously, and beat himself on his head and breast, until being quite overcome with grief, he fainted away, which made me fear for his life. In the meantime, the eunuchs and the officers came running at the Sultan's lamentations, and with much difficulty brought him to himself. It was not necessary that the prince or myself should relate the circumstances of the adventure, to convince them of the affliction it had occasioned us. The 2 heaps of ashes, to which the princess and the genie had been reduced, were a sufficient demonstration. The Sultan was hardly able to stand, but was under the necessity of being supported to his apartment. When the knowledge of this tragical event had spread through the palace and the city, all the people bewailed the misfortune of the princess, the Lady of Beauty, and commiserated the Sultan's affliction. Public mourning was observed for 7 days, and many ceremonies were performed. The ashes of the genie were thrown into the air, but those of the princess were collected into a precious urn, to be preserved, and the urn was deposited in a superb mausoleum, constructed for that purpose on the spot where the princess had been consumed. The grief of the Sultan for the loss of his daughter confined him to his chamber for a whole month. Before he had fully recovered his strength, he sent for me. "Prince," said he, "attend to the commands I now give you. Your life must answer if you do not carry them to execution." I assured him of exalt obedience, upon which he went on thus: "I have constantly lived in perfect felicity, but by your arrival all the happiness I possess has vanished. My daughter is dead, her governor is no more, and it is only through a miracle that I am myself yet alive. You are the cause of all these misfortunes, under which it is impossible that I should be comforted. Depart hence, therefore, in peace, without further delay, for I must myself perish if you remain any longer. I am persuaded that your presence brings misfortune with it. Depart, and take care never to appear again in my dominions. No consideration whatever shall hinder me from making you repent your temerity, should you violate my injunction." I was going to speak, but he prevented me by words full of anger, and I was obliged to quit the palace, rejected, banished, an outcast from the world. Before I left the city, I went into a bagnio. Here I caused my beard and eyebrows to be shaved, and put on a calender's habit. I began my journey not so much deploring my own miseries, as the death of the 2 fair princesses of which I have been the occasion. I passed through many countries without making myself known. At last I resolved to come to Baghdad, in hopes of getting myself introduced to the commander of the faithful, to move his compassion by relating to him my unfortunate adventures. I arrived this evening, and the first man I met was this calender, our brother, who spoke before me. You know the remaining part, madam, and the cause of my having the honour to be here." When the second calender had concluded his story, Zobeide, to whom he had addressed his speech, said, "It is well, you are at liberty." But instead of departing, he also petitioned the lady to show him the same favour vouchsafed to the first calender, and went and sat down by him. End of section 14.
Section 15 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Zera. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 15. The History of the Third Calendar. My story, most honourable lady, very much differs from what you have already heard. The 2 princes who have spoken before me have each lost an eye by the pure effects of their destiny, but mine I lost through my own fault, and by hastening to seek my own misfortune, as you shall hear by the sequel of the story. My name is Agib, and I am the son of a sultan who was called Cassib. After his death I took possession of his dominions, and continued in the city where he had resided. It is situated on the sea-coast, has one of the finest and safest harbours in the world, and arsenal capable of fitting out for sea 150 men of war, besides merchantmen and light vessels. My kingdom is composed of several fine provinces upon the mainland, besides a number of valuable islands, which lie almost in sight of my capital. My first object was to visit the provinces. I afterwards caused my whole fleet to be fitted out, and went to my islands to gain the hearts of my subjects by my presence, and to confirm them in their loyalty. These voyages gave me some taste for navigation, in which I took so much pleasure that I resolved to make some discoveries beyond my own territories, to which end I caused 10 ships to be fitted out, embarked, and set sail. Our voyage was very pleasant for 40 days successively, but on the 41st night the wind became contrary, and withal so boisterous that we were near being lost. About the break of day the storm abated, the clouds dispersed, and the weather became fair. We reached an island, where we remained 2 days to take in fresh provisions, and then put off again to sea. After 10 days' sail we were in hopes of seeing land, for the tempest we had experienced had so much abated my curiosity, that I gave orders to steer back to my own coast, but I perceived at the same time that my pilot knew not where we were. Upon the 10th day, a seaman being sent to look out for land from the masthead, gave notice that on starboard and larboard he could see nothing but sky and sea, but that right ahead he perceived a great blackness. The pilot changed colour at this account, and throwing his turban on the deck with one hand, and beating his breast with the other, cried, "Oh, sir, we are all lost! Not one of us can escape, and with all my skill it is not in my power to effect our deliverance." Having spoken thus, he lamented like a man who foresaw unavoidable ruin. His despondence threw the whole ship's crew into consternation. I asked him what reason he had thus to despair. He exclaimed, "The tempest has brought us so far out of our course that tomorrow upon noon we shall be near the Black Mountain, or mine of adamant, which at this very minute draws all your fleet towards it, by virtue of the iron in your ships. And when we approach within a certain distance, the attraction of the adamant will have such force, that all the nails will be drawn out of the sides and bottoms of the ships, and fastened to the mountain, so that your vessels will fall to pieces and sink. This mountain," continued the pilot, "is inaccessible. On the summit there is a dome of fine brass, supported by pillars of the same metal, and on the top of that dome stands a horse, likewise of brass, with a rider on his back, who has a plate or lid fixed to his breast, upon which some talismanic characters are engraved. Sir, the tradition is, that this statue is the chief cause why so many ships and men have been lost and sunk in this place, and that it will ever continue to be fatal to all those who have the misfortune to approach, until it shall be thrown down." The pilot, having finished his discourse, began to weep afresh, and all the rest of the ship's company did the same. I had no other thought but that my days were there to terminate. In the meantime every one began to provide for his own safety, and to that end took all imaginable precaution, and being uncertain of the event, they all made one another their heirs, by virtue of a will, for the benefit of those that should happen to be saved. The next morning we distinctly perceived the Black Mountain. About noon we were so near that we found what the pilot had foretold to be true, for all the nails and iron in the ships flew towards the mountain, where they fixed by the violence of the attraction with a horrible noise. The ships split asunder, and their cargoes sank into the sea. All my people were drowned, but God had mercy on me, and permitted me to save myself by means of a plank, which the wind drove ashore just at the foot of the mountain. I did not receive the least hurt, and my good fortune brought me to a landing place, where there were steps that led up to the summit of the mountain. At the side of these steps, for there was not a space of ground either on the right or the left whereon a man could set his foot, I gave thanks to God, and recommended myself to his holy protection, as I began to ascend the steps, which were so narrow that had the wind raged it would have thrown me into the sea. But, at last, I reached the top without accident. I went into the dome, and kneeling on the ground, gave God thanks for his mercies. I passed the night under the dome. In my sleep an old grave man appeared to me, and said, "Hearken, Agib, as soon as thou art awake, dig up the ground under the feet. Thou wilt find a bow of brass and 3 arrows of lead, that are made under certain constellations to deliver mankind from the many calamities that threaten them. Shoot the 3 arrows at the statue, and the rider will fall into the sea, but the horse will fall by the side. Thou must bury it in the place where thou findest the bow and arrows. This being done, the sea will swell and rise to the foot of the dome. When it has come so high, thou wilt perceive a boat with one man holding an oar in each hand. This man is also of metal, but different from that thou hast thrown down. Step on board, but without mentioning the name of God, and let him conduct thee. He will in 10 days' time bring thee into another sea, where thou shalt find an opportunity to return to the country, provided, as I have told thee, thou dost not mention the name of God during the whole voyage." This was the substance of the old man's discourse. When I woke, I felt much comforted by the vision, and did not fail to observe everything that he had commanded me. I took the bow and arrows out of the ground, shot at the horseman, and with the 3rd arrow I overthrew him. He fell into the sea, and the horse fell by my side. I buried it in the place whence I took the bow and arrows. In the meantime the sea swelled and rose up by degrees. When it came as high as the foot of the dome upon the top of this mountain, I saw afar off a boat rowing towards me, and I returned God thanks that everything succeeded according to my dream. At last the boat made land, and I perceived the man was made of metal, as I have dreamed. I stepped aboard, and took great heed not to pronounce the name of God, neither spoke I one word. I sat down, and the man of metal began to row off from the mountain. He rowed without ceasing till the 9th day, when I saw some islands, which gave me hopes that I should escape all the danger that I feared. The excess of my joy made me forget what I was forbidden. "Blessed be God," said I, "God be praised." I had no sooner spoken these words than the boat sank with the man of metal, leaving me upon the surface. I swam the remaining part of the day towards the land which appeared nearest. A very dark night succeeded, and not knowing where I was, I swam at random. My strength at last began to fail, and I despaired of being able to save myself. But the wind began to blow hard, and a wave vast as a mountain threw me on a flat, where it left me and retreated. I made haste ashore, fearing another wave might wash me back. The first thing I did was to strip, wring the water out of my clothes, and lay them on the dry sand, which was still warm from the heat of the day. Next morning the sun dried my clothes, I put them on, and went forward to discover what sort of country I was in. I had not walked far before I found I was upon a desert, though a very pleasant island, as it displayed several sorts of trees and wild shrubs bearing fruit. But I perceived it was far from the continent, which much diminished the joy I felt at having escaped the danger of the seas. Nevertheless, I recommended myself to God, and prayed him to dispose of me according to his will. Immediately after, I saw a vessel coming from the mainland, before the wind, directly toward the island. I doubted not but they were coming to anchor there, and being uncertain what sort of people they might be, whether friends or foes, I thought it not safe to be seen. I got up into a very thick tree, from whence I might safely view them. The vessel came into a little creek, where 10 slaves landed, carrying a spade and other instruments for digging up the ground. They went towards the middle of the island, where I saw them stop, and dig for a considerable time, after which I thought I perceived them lift up a trapdoor. They returned again to the vessel, and unloaded several sorts of provisions and furniture, which they carried to the place where they had been digging. They then descended, which made me suppose it led to a subterraneous dwelling. I saw them once more go to the ship, and returned soon after with an old man, who led in his hand a handsome lad of about 14 or 15 years of age. They all descended when the trapdoor had been opened. After they had again come up, they let down the trapdoor, covered it over with earth, and returned to the creek where the ship lay, but I saw not the young man in their company. This made me believe that he had stayed behind in the subterraneous place, a circumstance which exceedingly surprised me. The old man and the slaves went on board, and getting the vessel under way, steered their course towards the mainland. When I perceived they had proceeded to such a distance that I could not be seen by them, I came down from the tree, and went directly to the place where I had seen the ground broken. I removed the earth by degrees, till I came to a stone that was 2 or 3 feet square. I lifted it up, and found that it covered the head of a flight of stairs, which were also of stone. I descended, and at the bottom found myself in a large room, furnished with a carpet, a couch covered with tapestry, and cushions of rich stuff, upon which the young man sat, with a fan in his hand. These things, together with fruits and flower pots standing about him, I saw by the light of 2 wax tapers. The young man, when he perceived me, was considerably alarmed, but to quiet his apprehensions, I said to him as I entered, "Whoever you are, sir, do not fear. A sultan, and the son of a sultan, as I am, is not capable of doing you any injury. On the contrary, it is probable that your good destiny may have brought me hither to deliver you out of this tomb, where it seems you have been buried alive, for reasons to me unknown. But what surprises me, for you must know that I have been witness to all that hath passed since your coming to this island, is that you suffered yourself to be entombed in this place without any resistance." The young man felt assured at these words, and with a smiling countenance requested me to take a seat by him. When I had complied, he said, Prince, I am to acquaint you with what will surprise you by its singularity. My father is a merchant jeweller, who, by his industry and professional skill, has acquired a considerable property. He has many slaves and also agents, whom he employs as supercargoes in his own ships, to maintain his correspondence at the several courts, which he furnishes with precious stones. He had been long married without having issue, when it was intimated to him in a dream that he should have a son, though his life would be but short, at which he was much concerned when he awoke. Some days after, my mother acquainted him that she was with child, and what she supposed to be the time of her conception agreed exactly with the day of his dream. At the end of 9 months, she was brought to bed of me, which occasioned great joy in the family. My father, who had observed the very moment of my birth, consulted astrologers about my nativity, and was answered, "Your son shall live happily till the age of 15, when his life will be exposed to a danger which he will hardly be able to escape. But if his good destiny preserve him beyond that time, he will live to a great age. It will be," said they, "when the statue of brass that stands upon the summit of the mountain of adamant shall be thrown into the sea by Prince Agib, son of King Cassib, and, as the stars prognosticate, your son will be killed 50 days afterwards by that prince." My father took all imaginable care of my education until this year, which is the 15th of my age. He had notice given him yesterday that the statue of brass had been thrown into the sea about 10 days ago. This news alarmed him much. Upon the prediction the astrologers, he thought by all means possible to falsify my horoscope, and to preserve my life. He took the precaution to form this subterranean habitation to hide me in, till the expiration of the 50 days after the throwing down of the statue, and therefore, as it is 10 days since this happened, he came hastily hither to conceal me, and promised at the end of 40 days to return and fetch me away. For my own part, I am sanguine in my hopes, and cannot believe that Prince Agib will seek for me in a place underground, in the midst of a desert island. While the jeweller's son was relating this story, I laughed at the astrologers who had foretold that I should take away his life, for I thought myself so far from being likely to verify their prediction, that he had scarcely done speaking when I told him with great joy, "Dear sir, trust in the goodness of God, and fear nothing. Consider it as a debt you had to pay, but that you are acquitted of it from this hour. I rejoice that after my shipwreck I came so fortunately hither to defend you against all who would attempt your life. I will not leave you till the 40 days have expired, of which the foolish astrologers have made you apprehensive, and in the meanwhile I will do you all the service in my power, after which, with leave of your father and yourself, I shall have the benefit of getting to the mainland in your vessel. And when I am returned into my kingdom, I will remember the obligation I owe you, and endeavour to demonstrate my gratitude by suitable acknowledgments." This discourse encouraged the jeweller's son, and inspired him with confidence. I took care not to inform him I was the very Agib whom he dreaded, lest I should alarm his fears, and used every precaution not to give him any cause to suspect who I was. We passed the time in various conversation till night came on. I found the young man of ready wit, and partook with him of his provisions, of which he had enough to have lasted beyond the 40 days, though he had had more guests than myself. After supper we conversed for some time, and at last retired to bed. The next morning, when he arose, I held the basin of water to him. I also provided dinner, and at the proper time placed it on the table. After we had dined, I invented a play for our amusement, not only for that day, but for those that followed. I prepared supper after the same manner as I had done the dinner, and having supped, we retired to bed as before. We had sufficient time to contrast mutual friendship and esteem for each other. I found he loved me, and I on my part regarded him with so much affection that I often said to myself, "Those astrologers who predicted to his father that his son should die by my hand were impostors, for it is not possible that I could commit so base a crime. In short, madam, we spent 39 days in the pleasantest manner possible in this subterraneous abode. The 40th day appeared, and in the morning when the young man awoke, he said to me with a transport of joy that he could not restrain, "Prince, this is the 40th day, and I am not dead, thanks to God and your good company. My father will not fail to make you very shortly every acknowledgment of his gratitude for your attentions, and will furnish you with every necessary accommodation for your return to your kingdom. But," continued he, "while we are waiting his arrival, I beg you will provide me some warm water in that portable bath, that I may wash my body and change my dress, to receive my father with the more respect." I set the water on the fire, and when it was hot, poured it into the movable bath. The youth went in, and I both washed and rubbed him. At last he came out, and laid himself down in his bed that I had prepared. After he had slept a while, he woke, and said, "Dear prince, pray do me the favour to fetch me a melon and some sugar, that I may eat some to refresh me." Out of several melons that remained, I took the best, and laid it on a plate, and as I could not find a knife to cut it with, I asked the young man if he knew where there was one. "There is one," said he, "upon this cornice over my head." I accordingly saw it there, and made so much haste to reach it, that, while I had it in my hand, my foot being entangled in the carpet, I fell most unhappily upon the young man, and the knife pierced his heart. At this spectacle I cried out with agony. I beat my head, my face, and breast, I tore my clothes, I threw myself on the ground with unspeakable sorrow and grief. "Alas!" I exclaimed, "there were only some hours wanting to have put him out of that danger from which he sought sanctuary here. And when I thought the danger past, then I became his murderer, and verified the prediction. But, O Lord," said I, lifting up my face and my hands to heaven, "I entreat thee pardon, and if I be guilty of his death, let me not live any longer." After this misfortune, I would have embraced death without any reluctance, had it presented itself to me. But what we wish, whether it be good or evil, will not always happen accordingly to our desire. Nevertheless, considering that all my tears and sorrows would not restore the young man to life, and, the 40 days being expired, I might be surprised by his father, I quitted the subterranean dwelling, let down the great stone upon the entrance, and covered it with earth. I had scarcely done, when, casting my eyes upon the sea towards the mainland, I perceived the vessel coming to fetch away the young man. I began then to consider what I had best do. I said to myself, "If I am seen by the old man, he will certainly seize me, and perhaps cause me to be massacred by his slaves when he has discovered that his son is killed. All that I can allege to justify myself will not convince him of my innocence. It is better then to withdraw, while it is in my power, than to expose myself to his resentment." There happened to be near a large tree, thick with leaves, which I ascended in hopes of concealment, and was no sooner fixed in a place where I could not be perceived, than I saw the vessel come to the creek where she lay the first time. The old man with his slaves landed immediately, and advanced towards the subterranean dwelling with a countenance that shewed some hope. But when they saw the earth had been newly removed, they changed colour, particularly the old man. They lifted up the stone and went down. They called the young man by his name, but he not answering, their fears increased. They proceeded to seek him, and at length found him lying upon the bed with the knife in his heart, for I had not power to take it out. At this sight they cried out lamentably, which increased my sorrow. The old man fell down in a swoon. The slaves, to give him air, brought him up in their arms, and laid him at the foot of the tree where I was concealed. But notwithstanding all the pains they took to recover him, the unfortunate father continued a long while insensible, and made them more than once despair of his life. But at last he came to himself. The slaves then brought up his son's corpse, dressed in his best apparel, and when they had made a grave, they buried it. The old man, supported by 2 slaves, and his face covered with tears, threw the first earth upon the body, after which the slaves filled up the grave. This being done, all the furniture was brought up, and, with the remaining provisions, put on board the vessel. The old man, overcome with sorrow, and not being able to stand, was led upon a litter, and carried to the ship which stood out to sea, and in a short time was out of sight. After the old man and his slaves were gone, I was left alone upon the island. I lay that night in the subterranean dwelling which they had shut up, and when the day came, I walked round the island, and stopped in such places as I thought most proper for repose. I led this wearisome life for a whole month. At the expiration of this time, I perceived that the sea had receded, that the island had increased in dimensions. The mainland too seemed to be drawing nearer. In fact, the water sank so low that there remained between me and the continent but a small stream, which I crossed, and the water did not reach above the middle of my leg. I walked so long a way upon the slime and sand that I was very weary. At last I got upon more firm ground, and when I had proceeded some distance from the sea, I saw a good way before me something that resembled a great fire, which afforded me some comfort. For, I said to myself, I shall find here some persons, it not being possible that this fire should kindle of itself. As I drew nearer, however, I found my error, and discovered that what I had taken for a fire was a castle of red copper, which the beams of the sun made to appear at a distance like flames. I stopped in the neighbourhood of the castle, and sat down to admire its noble structure, and to rest myself. Before I had taken such a view of this magnificent building as it deserved, I saw 10 handsome young men coming along, as if they had been taking a walk, but what surprised me was, that they were all blind of the right eye. They were accompanied by an old man, who was very tall and of a venerable aspect. I could not suppress my astonishment at the sight of so many half-blind men in company, and every one deprived of the same eye. As I was conjecturing by what adventure these men could come together, they approached, and seemed glad to see me. After the first salutations, they inquired what had brought me thither. I told them my story would be somewhat tedious, but if they would take the trouble to sit down, I would satisfy their curiosity. They did so, and I related to them all that had happened to me since I had left my kingdom, which filled them with astonishment. After I had concluded my account, the young gentlemen prayed me to accompany them into the castle. I accepted their offer, and we passed through a great many halls, antechambers, bedchambers, and closets, very well furnished, and came at last into a spacious hall, where there were 10 small blue sofas set around, separate from one another, on which they sat by day and slept at night. In the middle of the circle stood an 11th sofa, not so high as the rest, but of the same colour, upon which the old man before mentioned sat down, and the young gentleman occupied the other 10. But as each sofa could only contain one man, one of the young men said to me, "Comrade, sit down upon that carpet in the middle of the room, and do not inquire into anything that concerns us, nor the reason why we are all blind of the right eye. Be content with what you see, and let not your curiosity extend any farther." The old man, having sat a short time, arose and went out, but he returned in a minute or two, brought in supper, distributed to each man separately his proportion, and likewise brought me mine, which I ate apart as the rest did, and when supper was almost ended, he presented to each of us a cup of wine. They thought my story so extraordinary, that they made me repeat it after supper, and it furnished conversation for a good part of the night. One of the gentlemen, observing that it was late, said to the old man, "You do not bring us that with which we may acquit ourselves of our duty." At these words the old man arose, and went into a closet, and brought out thence upon his head 10 basins, one after another, all covered with blue stuff. He placed one before every gentleman, together with a light. They uncovered their basins, which contained ashes, coal dust, and lamp-black. They mixed all together, and rubbed and bedaubed their faces with it in such a manner as to make themselves look very frightful. After having thus blackened themselves, they wept and lamented, beating their heads and breasts, and crying continually, "This is the fruit of our idleness and debauches." They continued this strange employment nearly the whole of the night, and when they left off, the old man brought them water, with which they washed their faces and hands. They changed all their clothes which were spoiled, and put on others, so that they exhibited no appearance of what they had been doing. You may judge how uneasy I felt all this time. I wished 1,000 times to break the silence which had been imposed upon me, and ask questions, nor was it possible for me to sleep that night. The next day, soon after we had arisen, we went out to walk, and then I said to them, "Gentlemen, I declare to you that I must renounce the law which you prescribed to me last night, for I cannot observe it. You are men of sense, you have convinced me that you do not want understanding. Yet I have seen you do such actions as none but madmen could be capable of. Whatever misfortune befalls me, I cannot forbear asking why you bedaubed your faces with black? How it has happened that each of you has but one eye? Some singular circumstance must certainly be the cause, therefore I conjure you to satisfy my curiosity." To these pressing instances they answered only that it was no business of mine to make such inquiries, and that I should do well to hold my peace. We passed that day in conversation upon indifferent subjects, and when night was come and every man had supped, the old man brought in the blue basins, and the young gentlemen, as before, bedaubed their faces, wept and beat themselves, crying, "This is the fruit of our idleness and debauches," and continued the same actions the following night. At last, not being able to resist my curiosity, I earnestly prayed them to satisfy me, or to shew me how to return to my own kingdom, for it was impossible for me to keep them company any longer, and to see every night such an odd exhibition without being permitted to know the reason. End of section 15.